Hello, it's lovely to be here, and a big welcome to anybody who's joining us. My name's Annalise Jennings, and I'm a believer of the relentless spirit and potential of humanity. I've run my own business now for over 15 years, and I'm absolutely dedicated to helping to create a more connected humanity. I believe the most important consideration as women today is the knowing that we all have stories of wisdom from the field, that we each have content to share. And in the sharing of that content, I believe that you, me, each of us as women have the power to shift humanity in a positive way.
I'm Di Gillett, and this is the Power of Women podcast. Hey, I'm Di Gillett, and welcome to another episode of the Power of Women podcast. So today we're going to explore connectedness. And it's an interesting topic at what I feel is a really interesting time in our society. And we're potentially at an inflection point as connection in so many settings has been challenged. I'm fortunate today to be joined on the podcast by Annalise Jennings from Dynamic Exchange. And against the backdrop of dwindling connections, we'll hear more about her endeavours to integrate the timeless principles of belonging, connectedness, and importantly, caring. Annalise Jennings, welcome to the Power of Women podcast.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
Great. Annalise, your background growing up is part of Australia's rich multicultural tapestry. Where were you born?
I was born in Palermo, Sicily.
And came out at what age?
I was 2.
2, so your whole life. Lovely. And as someone with an immigrant background, what was the most significant challenge you faced growing up in Australia?
I feel for me it was a huge void in belonging and connection, but I couldn't articulate it. It was something that I felt, and I didn't understand what I was feeling. And through adolescence and moving into adult life, and now as a mature age woman, it's been quite a journey of discovery, Di, and it's really shaped my work and the ethos of what I do.
In what way in particular? Because I find I'm married into a multicultural family, and I find the stories fascinating because it's a very different journey culturally growing up for you than it would have been for me as a white Anglo-Saxon.
Yes, absolutely. Well, we migrated to Australia in the 60s. And at a time when Australia was not always hospitable to new migrants. And so the bullying at school, not so much towards me because I was quite young, but certainly towards my older siblings. And I recall my older brother saying as a child, I feel like we are no people. We don't belong here, but we can't go back.
How much older than you was he?
He's 5 years older than me, but I remember those words, and they stayed with me. And my parents threw themselves into work almost immediately, 6-7 days a week. And so it became my sister's responsibility to take care of the running of the house, cook, clean, look after us 2 younger siblings, and dress us, take us to school. And Di, she was only 9.
Oh, wow. A lot of responsibility for a 9-year-old.
Yeah, let that sink in. And I remember my mother being heckled because she couldn't speak the language, and stones being thrown at the window where she worked. And so essentially we came from a very vast and connected family network in Sicily to just being us here in Melbourne. So as children, we just had to figure it out, and we had to learn how to survive and how to thrive. There were many upsides, which I'm also happy to share, but I believe it's from some of those earlier contexts that this yearning for belonging and connectedness, which then became, as I mentioned earlier, a motivator for possibility, has really shaped me.
Mm. So those learnings and experiences, did they stand you in good stead embarking on a career in corporate banking, which was your earlier career, which wouldn't have been an easy place for a female forging a leadership career, I'm sure?
Yes, absolutely, and certainly, and here is the upside to some of those experiences where my father established himself as a leading manufacturing jeweller in Victoria, and my mother designed superb wedding dresses and cocktail dresses.
That's a good marriage of two parts of the equation.
It's exactly. And so they thrived in their respective businesses, and they studied English at night school and really put themselves on a fast track for learning and success. And so failure was not an option, and they really did help to shape that early entrepreneurial Italian spirit that formed the shape of, particularly Lygon Street, Carlton, all those years ago. And it was certainly that resilience and that power of the human spirit to succeed that I'm grateful for.
And would it be fair to say you absorbed that and learnt that around the family dinner table?
Yes, certainly. We did through those dialogues, but, you're thrown into the centre of something that is very different to anything that you've been used to. And so the yearning for belonging, connection, is something that has been a part of me for as long as I can remember. But over the years also, the bringing together of friendships and networks of all Australians, of all nationalities, is something that my parents beautifully fostered. So they really did teach me the gift of resilience, strong business ethics, to never give up, even in the face of adversity. But they also taught me in those younger years that those relationships and those friendships is the epicenter of where we learn to thrive with one another and connect and co-create.
So could you share some real life examples of how that assisted you in your career in the banking sector?
Well, I was only 17 when I applied for my very first job in banking. And I was offered the job at the interview, and I think because I'd already been working since I was 14 years old in customer-facing roles like supermarkets, delis, and in my father's jewellery business, wherever I could find work. I think that held me in good stead at the tender age of 17. And my employer wanted me to start immediately. And I remember saying, "Oh, but I can't, it's school holidays." And can I start in February? So I was heading to Sorrento with my friends. So I remember that quite vividly, my very first interview, and learned.
They still offered you the job?
Absolutely.
And they waited.
I learned the gift of negotiating skills very, very early. But, fast forward to motherhood at a very young age, I didn't expect to be a single parent, and I didn't have a degree at the time. And so I tried to climb the corporate ladder as far as I could, but I just kept hitting this ceiling and I couldn't make ends meet. And
That's an emotional thought. Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. It stays with you. And I remember a day of absolute desperation. I was literally in the fetal position on the floor, and my two young boys, they might have been 7 and 9 at the time, were patting me on the back and saying, "Mum, how can we help?" And I said to them, "Go to school and be good mates, and I'll do everything else."
So connectedness has been this thread everywhere, right from very, very early on.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we made that pact, and 30 years on, we've stuck to that, and they continue to be pillars in my life. And I wouldn't have been able to climb the corporate ladder without their partnership. It's not something that you do by yourself.
That's a really interesting phrase when referenced to children, partnership. That's
Yes.
It's not a common phrase referenced in relation to children.
Yes, it has been a partnership, and many times I've felt that they have been my mentors. So we've had a very connected and respectful and loving relationship, and it's not always about the parent knowing what's right or what's best. We were all young, really, and so we, the three of us just have to figure it out together. And the blessing I had is that we were able to do that. And so in corporate, and to help me reach those higher echelons, I enrolled in university and did my university at night school and studied a postgraduate degree in project management and risk management, and set myself a goal then to reach senior management within 5 years. And I did just that. And it wasn't because I wanted the title per se, although the title did bring a lot of influence, but it was the responsibility that I felt as a parent to not find myself on the fetal position on the floor again. I didn't want to experience that again. And so many lessons were learnt along the way, and I held quite senior roles in large-scale projects and governance and so on. But my personal mantra was always one of resilience and to never give up. And my lens was that irrespective of the technical roles that I had, that we could create spaces of belonging and connection where people could feel safe, where people could reach their fullest potential. And even to the extent of establishing the first meditation room in corporate Australia, which was, back in 2000, and that was pretty groundbreaking.
2000. Was that hard to get up?
Oh, my
Was
goodness.
it embraced, or were they looking sideways?
They were looking sideways, and I remember a senior person at the time saying, "You'll never succeed, this is a bank."
Which was what euphemism for "you'll never succeed with all of these guys," or what was that? What were they really saying?
Well, there was a bit of that as well. There was certainly, the fact that I was a woman, the fact that I felt that the meditation space would actually help us to thrive as human beings trying to survive in corporate environments.
Who backed you in?
Oh,
Who backed you in on that?
It took 9 months of, doors slamming in my face, literally, and, phone calls, resulting in being, you hear the click at the other end of the phone, and being told
This is over.
by another manager, if you continue to do this, you'll have the worst performance review that you've ever had. Because it was something I was doing in my own spare time. Yeah, absolutely.
That's a level threat.
And so, but I was taught to survive. I was taught to thrive. I was taught to look for ways, even in the face of adversity. And through the building of relationships that I had a strong network, even as a junior manager back then. I found partnerships and supporters in senior levels, that supported me, and we were able to make it happen. It took 9 months. And I remember on the eve that we opened, we held a group meditation, and I really thought maybe it was my last day at the bank. But the CEO came with all of his executive team and supporters. We must have had over 100 people in there, and we did a group meditation together. And I have to say, from then on, I fast developed a reputation for developing balanced, pragmatic and strategic cultures, and where we could all win together. So that was a turning point.
I was going to say exactly, you took the words out of my mouth. That must have been an absolute turning point in the direction of where your career went next.
Yes, absolutely. It was a fundamental turning point, and the promotions happened from there forward.
Mm. So what drives you today?
So what drives me today is to continue to build on the narrative of belonging, connectedness and caring for the whole, not just in corporate agendas, but in all agendas. And a few years on from the experience I shared with you, I was tapped on the shoulder to work in Aboriginal communities, and so that took on another form of its own, but certainly climbing the corporate ladder at a time when gender and equality was not even talked about.
Was not on the agenda at all.
It just wasn't a topic, and so I was often the only woman at the executive table. But it never occurred to me that I shouldn't be there. I was aware of it, but it didn't occur to me that that wasn't my space. I was so
you
wired.
had no self-doubt at that stage. You were very clear about what you were there to do.
Well, I was so wired for resilience and work ethic and protecting my children that my emotional turbocharger for success and getting things over the line was in constant overdrive. And there were the repercussions.
I was going to say that would not come without repercussions.
No, and so certainly what did start to suffer and what I noticed more and more were some very unsustainable work practices, and often on the edge of burnout. And, to give you another example, my boys and I had to move house several times, either due to work opportunities or affordability. But we would move an entire house over a weekend without missing a beat, without missing a day of work, without them missing a day of school. And as a woman, I felt I didn't, and this is at a subconscious level, as a woman, I felt that I didn't ever want to give a reason for poor performance because I missed a day's work. So I became a bit of a machine, actually.
I can understand that. That's a fascinating insight. So coming up, we're going to hear more about your pursuit of positive change. If you're loving the Power of Women podcast, be sure to jump onto our YouTube channel and hit that subscribe button to ensure you never miss an episode. So like so many women who have joined me on the podcast over the last 12 months, Annalise represents the growing number of successful female entrepreneurs. Annalise, you've always been interested in people, which you shared with us in the earlier part of this discussion, and you've got extensive experience in risk. Risk and culture have played a key role in the business you founded a decade ago, Dynamic Exchange. Tell us about the work you've been doing with our First Nations people.
Well, there's a bit of a bridge which I'll explain to First Nations. And while I was still in corporate banking, I developed 5 core principles for success, which continue to drive me personally and professionally. So the first is belonging, which really speaks to a space of ownership. The second is connectedness, where my success is your success, my failure is your failure. The third is caring for the well-being of the whole, which means we really need to leave our individual agendas at the back door and come together in a conversation about what are we here to create together. And the other principle is around welcoming the stranger, which speaks for itself, the wisdom that a stranger brings into the fold. And so these were principles that I felt strongly for in my time in corporate, but I didn't completely understand them until I was tapped on the shoulder to work in Aboriginal communities, which is where I was able to really ground my intuition about these principles into something that actually became me.
And this was still through the corporate lens. So you were still working in the bank when they recognised these leadership qualities and tapped you on the shoulder for this piece of work?
Yes. So yeah. I took a long-needed break to Cape York, where I was asked to be godmother to a little girl. And it was during that period that I met two Aboriginal elders, and we started to talk about some of these principles of ownership and engagement and connection, and we had a resonance with one another. So they asked me to stay a little bit longer, which I did. So I took an extra 2 weeks off work, and they took me out to their traditional land and made me a billy tea. Well, they didn't take me. I actually went there, and it was like a 4-hour drive. And
on dusty roads.
Wasn't really sure what was going to happen when I got there, but I found this particular place, and they made me a cup of billy tea by a billabong, where I was really worried about the crocodiles who might come out and say good morning.
I think we're writing a song about now. Yeah.
So, but they assured me everything was okay. So me being a little bit of a risk taker, I said, okay, well, let's have this cup of tea. And they started to share with me the plight of Aboriginal people and the isolation that they felt existed in some of these more remote areas. And I listened to their story, and they shared with me that 2 of their 5 children had taken their lives. And what we didn't know at that time is that there would be a third. Mm-hmm. And I remember my heart actually hurting, like physical pain, as they were sharing their story. And I knew in that moment that I wasn't going back to corporate banking. And they asked me if I could stay longer and have some dialogue around some of these principles that I'd been exploring with their communities. And so to cut a long story short, I took 3 months long service leave and dedicated myself to community. And then I took 12 months leave without pay and dedicated that. And I remember my executive calling me and saying, Annalise, you have to come back. You're out of leave.
So you were still in Cape York at this point?
I was still in Cape York. I didn't expect to be there that long. I thought I would just stay there for a few weeks. But 18 months later, I was still there, and my executive said to me, we've actually changed buildings since you've been gone. You have to come back.
We've rebranded. Do you know who we are?
And I said, I can't. I've started a conversation now, and that I can't step away from. And I didn't know how long I would be there.
Do you know why you couldn't step away? What was it that was holding you?
The people. their hopes, their aspirations, the conversations that we had started around creating strategies of possibilities, because one of the other principles that started to emerge was the shift from problem to possibility, and that was the fifth principle that landed. So rather than looking at communities through the lens of a problem to be solved, we started to build our strategies around communities being places of hope and possibility and gifts. And so let's build our strategies based on the hope of the future rather than on the damage of the past. And so in the heart of those conversations, where consistent themes were starting to emerge around what could actually shift in these remote communities, I couldn't leave. And so I remember somebody in a community asking me, Annalise, how long are you here for? And I said, well, I'm here until I'm not. And I didn't realise that that would be 6 years.
6 years. Good heavens. Wow. So if we look at those principles, they could be translated to any setting in society, be it education, be it governance, be it sense of community, be it integration of immigrants into a new space. I mean, you could apply it everywhere.
Yes, absolutely. I don't think anybody can argue with the knowing that we need more belonging and connection in our societies, that we need conversations of possibility, that we need to care for the whole, that we need to welcome the stranger and the wisdom that the stranger brings into the fold. That in itself speaks to diversity. So the work in communities started to reach a crescendo where I was then asked to speak about some of the learnings, and the recognition of that actually took me to where I am now and what my work is now all about. And so as we started to gain success in developing sustainable communities, and I say we because it wasn't just me, it was a co-creative process with every sector of the community, from students to elders, and everybody in between played a part. And so that recognition that started to comes in so many different ways. And for me, it came in the form of it came under the umbrella of a paperbark tree on sacred land.
That's not a world stage being handed an award, is it? But it's potentially far more impactful and meaningful.
It really was, and there were members there of a particular Aboriginal nation, and family members, Aboriginal and family members. And that day under the paperbark tree, I was
We're still writing a song.
Here it is in the making.
Yeah.
I was blessed with an Aboriginal name after 6 years in community. They gave me an Aboriginal name.
Acceptance and recognition.
Yes. And my Aboriginal name is Keely, which was given to me by my adopted tribal mother. Her name is Mary Ann Coconut. And
what does Keely mean?
And Keely is, when I asked what the significance was, she said it's the spirit between heaven and earth, the messenger between heaven and earth. And so the recognition that comes in so many different ways. And I've been nominated with various awards, and I've been asked to do a TED talk, and I've been a finalist for the Banksia Awards. I've been invited to Nobel as in recognition of addressing the United Nations global goals.
I think they need you back.
I feel humbled for all of those moments of recognition, but it was that day under the paperbark tree that stays with me. Yeah.
Yep. It hit you then, it hit me. Yeah. That's
And so coming back to your question around, what am I doing now? How am I continue to bring these sentiments into current places? It's through a number of these dialogues on the world stage that there was a resonance with certain organisations around the world that also felt that these conversations were needed. And so these days, and for the past 8 years, I've been bringing the principles of belonging, connection, caring for the whole into mainstream strategies for those organisations that have an appetite and are listening for this sort of work.
Are you able to name one or two to give us a sense of the types of organisations? Because if we look through the lens of organisations we would like to work for, this sounds like the basis of organisations that would be on the list based on their principles, their behaviours, and the culture that they're building. So with that in mind, is it appropriate to mention some of the clients that you work with?
I'll say only that they are major universities.
Okay.
It's not so much the nature of the industry, but it's really, when I'm on a world stage and, I've done a TEDx talk as well, there's a resonance that appeals to certain individuals irrespective of the industry. So I've worked in rail, I've worked in university settings, in banking settings, in community, state government, local government.
The behaviour doesn't belong to a sector, it belongs to individuals.
And that's the essence here. It takes one person. It takes one shaker and mover to then engage with others. And pretty soon then we have a tipping point. And when we reach that 30% tipping point in any group dynamic, change becomes self-sustaining. That's it. We're on our way. So that's what I look for. I look for those moments of resonance with individuals, irrespective of where they are on the hierarchy, that really want to make a difference and believe that this ethos is actually a part of their own social fabric and part of their own DNA. And then we're off, we're moving.
It sounds like a more wide-reaching approach to diversity, equity and inclusion than perhaps I have heard to date. I love it. It's really impactful. So, using a word out of your playbook.
Thank you.
So, Annalise, taking it away from the work you're doing and perhaps seeking your opinion on this against the backdrop of cultural unrest around the world, and latterly the rise of cultural discord here at home, how do we build a harmonious sense of community in Australia?
Well, certainly through the adoption of those 5 principles and how they apply to you, how you can build them into your everyday work and into your life ethos. I've presented across multiple Rotary organisations as well, and also at their international conference last year. And when people come together in a conversation about what does belonging actually mean for me? What does caring for the whole actually mean in my small dynamic, and how do I take it more broadly? I believe that's where the magic is, and those are the questions that people can be asking themselves. It starts with a small gathering, but always trust in the power of that small gathering. You don't know where it's going to take you.
You've learned a lot from your time up in Cape York. It's part of your language now.
It is, and I believe it was always part of my heart, mind, soul. I just didn't know how to articulate it until I sat in those environments and experienced the realness of life outside of the walls of corporate institutionalism where I grew up. I was only 17. And it wasn't until, and I'm grateful for all those experiences. But they can also be very synthetic and very task oriented. So the shift from a task orientation to relational was something that I really needed to learn and understand.
And that's not an easy sell, is it? It's a bit like selling a product versus selling a service, because one is tangible, the other is not. So to your point of finding one person who believes in it, to then building to that massive 30% where you've now got sustainable change, given it's not something you can pick up and hold, but it is something you can wrap your arms around, is quite extraordinary.
Well, it's 15 years in my own consultancy now, Di, so the listening is out there. And as I said, it starts with one individual and it just starts to permeate through a group, an organisation, a community.
Yeah, well done.
There's always work to be done.
Yeah, well done. So, Annalise, could I ask you a final question today, coming back specifically to the power of women? In your opinion, what's the most significant challenge women are facing today? And on that basis of what it is, what do we need to do?
Well, I come back to, to some of my opening comments, that having the knowing that we each have stories of wisdom from the field and that we each have content to share. And it really starts with asking yourself those age-old questions: who am I? What's my purpose? Why am I here? And what is my soul calling me to do that can change the course of humanity? And when that knowing comes to you, have faith. Just start where you are. Start anywhere. Don't wait.
Terrific. Annalise, thank you very much for joining me on the Power of Women podcast. It's been a powerful discussion, and I know I overplay that word, but it's without pun intended, because today's topic has been one that has been quite enlightening. Hopefully for those listening to today's podcast, that sense of connectedness, those core principles in which you've established a whole ethos have resonated. Please be sure to share this episode. And if you're interested in learning more about what Annalise does, jump onto her website, Dynamic Exchange. And I'm sure you can connect with her there. And I'll also put some points of connection in the show notes. Thank you for listening. Please follow and share. Until next time. I'm Di Gillett, and this is the Power of Women podcast.